tomorrow. If you are taking AP Psychology, you are in the right place and you are looking at the right study guide pack. At Marco Learning, we have a free study guide pack for you. It's 35 pages. It's more than you could need on each of the units, and it's available to you in our description of this video, and it's pinned at the top of the chat. So let me know in the chat whether you've ever used this study guide pack. Hopefully it is easy to access. And again, that description is there in the chat for you. Tonight, we're going to welcome Liz Severson onto the Marco Learning YouTube channel. Liz has been an educator in AP Psychology, knows everything about this exam, and has led our exam reviews for the last couple of years. Tonight, it's 1 hour long. We're going to save this recording to our channel, and we're going to add it to the suite of other reviews that we've done over the last few years. There's hours of review videos on our channel. So Liz, I'll welcome you to join, and then we'll take a look at the slide deck that you're going to be presenting from, which you shared. Liz, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. I'm cooked. I'm not cooked. I can't figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I want to just real quick in the chat, everyone, just to get us warmed up, in all capital letters, type, I am not cooked. And you're about to make sure that you're not cooked, that you're undercooked, that you're still in the freezer with Mrs. Severson to guide us through all this. So I'm John. I'm going to join us in the chat, hang out and learn with the rest of you about how to get a 5 on AP Psychology.
Hey, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Liz Severson, and I am a teacher in Wisconsin, if you can't tell from my accent already. Super excited to be here with you tonight. I know it's a big time with us having our test tomorrow. So let's get started. So just as an overview with the multiple choice, our test is still on paper. So with our test on paper, you're going to have a multiple choice, and you need to bring number 2 pencils, not mechanical. And you will have 100 questions to answer in 70 minutes. And then the free response, you need to use black or blue pen. And you want to bring 1 or 2 of those as well in case one runs out. So bring 2. And then it will be concept, application, and research design. So what I would like to do, okay, is focus on this part here. So as far as the unit breakdown goes, this is our breakdown for the multiple choice. So I want to make sure that we're hitting the biggest units. If you have to prioritize your studying, you want to look at these percentages here. Okay, so you see that the scientific foundations is 10 to 14%, but we also know that that is going to be a FRQ. So we want to make sure that we're hitting that one as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out this lesson by looking at research design, and then looking at the research design FRQ and just a general FRQ. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to our biggest unit, the highest percentage, which is going to be that cognitive psych at that 13 to 17%. A lot of vocab on there also appears on the free response. And then we'll move to clinical psych and motivation and emotion. And we'll see where we're at with time, but I do have slides prepared. So even if we don't get to it, you're certainly welcome to look at the rest of it, but you also have that study guide available to you. That will be an excellent resource. So the first thing we're going to look at is when we are thinking about this Scantron, this multiple choice. I know you haven't probably grown up using Scantron. So there's a couple different strategies that you can use. You are going to have a separate booklet, and you're going to have your answer key. And your answer key is going to kind of look like this. It's not the exact one. Okay, so your answer key, you're going to fill in separately. And you can see here you have the A, B, C, D, and you want to make sure that you fill that in completely like that. Okay, and if I go back here, think with your pencil. So you have that side, you have that separate test booklet, write all over it. So if you don't know what one is, scribble out the ones that you know it's not. And that's a really big advantage that you can't do when you're taking a test online. Another really excellent strategy is to read the question and try to answer it before looking at the responses. If you can answer it, look and see if something matches. If it doesn't, kind of pause, look and see what would fit. And then finally, make an educated guess. Whatever you do, do not leave your test blank. You have a 20% chance of getting the question correct. If you can eliminate a few of them, you increase your likelihood. So do not leave any blank. And if you have time, come back to the question, make a note in the answer book. So again, this is our Scantron that we're looking at. Make sure you use those pencils. And if you do make a mistake, erase it as best you can. All right, so now let's get into a little bit more of the content with scientific foundations of psychology. I'm primarily going to be focusing on the research design. I'm not going to be looking as much at the history of psychology, but that is a component that would be in this unit. So the biggest thing here is we want to know the purposes, advantages, and disadvantages. So you could see questions like this in the multiple choice. High likelihood that you will see in the research scenario that you have to decide what type of study it is, what would be the advantages, what conclusions can we draw. So when we look here at the methods, okay, we're really looking at how do we study. And those first ones with how do we study are the descriptive methods. And all these do is describe information. We aren't able to draw like a cause and effect conclusion here. Okay, so the biggest thing that we're looking at is that we describe. With correlation, this takes it a little step further. With correlation, we can predict, we can show a relationship. We can say that if this happens, this is likely to happen. But remember, correlation does not equal causation. So make sure that you don't get tripped up with that. And then finally, experimentation. This is the one that can demonstrate cause and effect. Okay, so that's the one when we're looking at a research design, a lot of times researchers will say they're doing an experiment, but then they forget to do random assignment and have a control group, things like that. But that's the only one that can show cause and effect. Now, the other thing we need to know is the difference between methods and ethics, because sometimes we'll read a research scenario and we have to identify what's wrong ethically with it. So the ethics is looking at more, should we study? Okay, and this is looking at the big five here, okay, the informed consent, minimized harm, etc. And what we're looking at is we want to make sure that we are protecting the participants. And these would be human participants. With animal participants, we want to ensure minimized harm, clear scientific purpose. But with these, we want to make sure we're following these. And if you're reading a scenario, you want to look at what's explicitly mentioned in the scenario, and I'll show you that in an example. Also with debriefing, if there was deception, you would need to make sure that that is revealed. Big thing here, know the difference between methods and ethics. How do we study versus should we study? So I do have this, and I don't want to go over it too much, but it is definitely some slides that you can look at. The biggest thing I want to talk about is with that disadvantages. The descriptive methods do not show that cause and effect. And the other one that stands out a lot to me too is that case study. Remember, if we do a case study, we have weakened generalizability. We cannot replicate it a lot of times, and it really what's true for that person may not be true for everybody. Okay, and then correlation and experimentation, we have those purposes and advantages. With correlation, sometimes we mistakenly infer causation. Also, there could be third factor variables. So if there is, you see that ice cream consumption and lifeguard rescues are positively correlated, the third factor there could be the temperature or summer. Okay, more people are eating ice cream in summer and more people are swimming, which means they're more likely to have need a rescue. Okay, so let's practice this a little bit, and I'm going to do the Milgram study as an example. So the Milgram study, remember, is the shock study where you have the teacher and the learner. And what we're trying to see here, are people going to obey the authority figure? So by far, the number one term that is asked on the FRQ in the last 10 years is the operational definition of the dependent variable. So the operational definition is the specifics of the variable. So I'd like to give you an example here. If we look at Milgram's obedience study, okay, so the independent variable is the authority figure that's telling the teacher to continue. Please continue. It's essential that you continue. Okay, and what's going to happen then, okay, is the dependent variable is obedience. And I want you to think about, how are we measuring obedience? Okay, the operational definition typically has to be in a number. It has to be something that I can quantify. So when I look at Milgram's obedience study, okay, I am going to be looking at the specifics here and how we're measuring obedience. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure how far up do they go on the scale. Okay, and this should be wrong. This should be teacher, and that other one should be student, but I don't think that's a big deal. Okay, so here you have this going all the way up. Okay, if they go to 450 volts, that's the operational definition. They go to 300, that's the operational definition. The number that they get to is how we are specifically measuring obedience in this case. Now, the biggest thing is, why do we need this? And this is going to be really crucial on your free response question. When we look here, the operational definitions help us replicate the study. Okay, and make sure that we're measuring things the same way. So if I were to do an example that I am growing tomatoes, okay, so I have one pot of tomatoes that has no fertilizer, and I have another one where it's adding this really cool fertilizer. So I have these two that I'm going to water the same, they're going to get the same sun. Well, if I do that and I decide my operational definition is how tall it gets, and then somebody else uses a fertilizer and their operational definition is how much fruit it bears, we aren't really replicating and getting the same information. Height over how much fruit it is measuring it in different ways. So the operational definitions is going to allow us to replicate the study, which then increases generalizability. In this case, this fertilizer works for getting more fruit. Okay, if I'm doing that and somebody else is measuring it that way, then we know that it is going to be, we can more confidently say that this independent variable caused the change. So some other things then is knowing the difference between the measures of central tendency and the measures of variation. Definitely know the mean, median, mode. Okay, so when we're looking at the mean is the mathematical average. The median is the number that appears in the middle. And then the mode is the one that appears most often. Okay, and this is one number that represents a whole set of data. So it does give us a small picture of information. The measures of variation, like range, which is when you take the largest number minus the smallest number to get the range. The histogram and standard deviation I'll show you on the next slide. So let's take a look at mean, median, mode. So if we were to be conducting a study, a researcher is investigating if owning a pet is related to happiness. Each person reported the number of pets, and the data is below. I just want you to take 20 seconds here to see if you can at least find the median. Okay, sorry. All right, so what we're going to do here is we are going to find the mean. We have to add them up. If you add up the 5 numbers, it's 15. And then you divide by 5, that gets 3. The median then is going to be 2 because we have to put them in order. Okay, and then you have to decide which measure of central tendency is going to be better to use to represent this data. And the answer for that is going to be the median because you have this outlier of 9. Okay, so 2 better represents the data, and I'll look at here when you would use the mean over the median. So again, if there's an outlier, if it's a skewed distribution, the median is going to be the way to go. Otherwise, you're going to default to the mean. And then here we have the difference between a bar graph, because sometimes on the free response, you need to draw something. So the bar graph here, make sure you would label the x-axis and the y-axis. Okay, the y is usually going to have whatever data you're measuring, like the dependent variable. And then the histogram is a little bit different because this looks like a bell curve. Okay, I'm using this with my trackpad, so it's not very pretty. But here you can see that this is a skewed distribution. More data falls on this side of the mean, which would be probably down here. And that means that you would use the median because it's going to accurately represent. That means 50% falls above, 50% falls below. Okay, and here's what I'd like you to do is if the mean is 50 and the standard deviation is 10, what percentage of the population falls between 40 and 60? Okay, and if you can type an answer in the chat, and then I do have another question to answer here too. Just do a quick check-in. Okay, so with this, the mean always goes in the middle, okay, where this in a normal distribution, it's going to go here. This is actually the mean, median, and mode. Here, it's going to be 60. Here, it's going to be 40, and that's 1 deviation. So 68% of the population, okay, the answer is B, falls between 40 and 60. Okay. And then here would be a skewed distribution. The big thing that I always say with the positive skew is I draw the arrow and it's pointing to the positive side of the number line. And then a negative skew is pointing to the negative side of the number line. And then the mode is always the peak. Okay, so that's something that's pretty easy to tell. So I did have a question from the experimental design. There's two things that we always want to know or that will make it an experiment. One is random assignment. Random assignment is only used in experimentation. And then the other is it has to have a control group. You have to have something that it is compared to. Now, if we were to look at things with like quasi experiments, which we don't really get that in depth with, what we're looking at here is in a pretty classic example in a research design. If there's no control group, if there's no random assignment, we cannot confidently infer causation. Okay, and we'll take a look at an example here. Okay, so FRQ, super important. And we know that question 2 is the research design. So this is another way that you can really look at stuff and make sure that you're, like if you have to prioritize your studying, this would be my number one thing to study. So when we look at answering the free response question, my advice to you is read both questions and then answer the easier one first. Because if the easier one takes 15 minutes, then you have 35 minutes or so to answer the more difficult question. You can take your time to think. Think with your pen. Remember, you have to write in black or blue pen. You can jot down notes on the question booklet. Whatever you write in there isn't scored. Whatever you write in the booklet, your answer booklet, is scored. And AP Psych teachers around the country love using the SOTUS format. Graders love this format because they know what to look for and it makes it super easy to grade. You have to remember that there's hundreds of AP Psych teachers, psych professors, retired teachers that are spending a week grading essays 7 days straight. So they want their job to be as easy as possible. And you can do that by following this format. And it helps you to make sure that you're answering all parts of the question. So the first part is this, space out your answer. What that means is between each term, you want to make sure that you leave a space. So if I am writing a paragraph like this, okay, and then I'm done, I'm going to leave a space here, and then the next term will go like that. Okay, if you don't do that, at least indent each paragraph. Don't have it one giant clump. Make sure you're following the order of the question, and I know sometimes you might skip one. Just because you're so into writing and it's not like you can go and just insert with a paragraph, just make a note, say number 4 is at the end. And then especially for units 2 through 9, define the term. And this is going to help enhance your example. And I will share an example with that in just a second. Make sure you always apply it to the prompt and then use synonyms. So an example is, let's say there was a question on the general, the stress response, and it's the exhaustion stage. And you say they would be exhausted in that stage. Okay, that isn't going to score. You want to use a synonym. They would be burnt out. They're going to be more likely, their immune system's going to be weakened, so they're going to be prone to sickness. You don't want to say you'd be exhausted in the exhaustion stage. Okay, so here's a just brief scenario that we can look at. And really looking at here a few things that I have bolded to draw your attention to. So a teacher wants to study whether start time of school day affects student stress. Normal day is 8 to 3, but students can sign up to have their school days be 10 to 5. They need the permission. I'm going to go down a line. At the start of the school year, all students complete a stress survey and earn a stress score. At the end of the semester, students complete the same survey and she compares the two groups. She then publishes the list to all staff members. Okay, so we can kind of see some red flags here already. So here's 2 questions. What is one research flaw and how would you fix it? Okay, so when you're reading this, make sure you really know what's being asked. Sometimes it'll just say identify the research flaw. Sometimes it'll say it and how you would fix it. You have to make sure you're answering both parts. And I want you to think here. And you can type this in the chat. It should be pretty quick. What is one research flaw that you see here with this study? Okay. And then I want you to think too, just really quick, what's one ethical flaw? Just list one word from the 5. We had informed consent, minimized harm. We had confidentiality, voluntary participation, and debriefing. Which one do you think is missing there? and then we'll come back and look at that operational definition. So when we look at this, okay, here's how you should answer this. Okay, one research flaw is that she did not use random selection. Okay, students signed up for the class time. So there's two things I want to point out to you here. You need to have the vocab word, which would be random selection, and then you need to have the scenario. Okay, like an example from the scenario. Don't just say she didn't have random selection, explain why. Okay, she didn't use random selection because students signed up for class times. You want to make sure that you have both parts, vocab and example. And because this is asking this to fix this, she could randomly select students to participate and invite them to be in the 10 a.m. group. So I'm missing a word there, but that's fine. Okay, randomly select. Now, knowing that when you're answering the ethics part, okay, one ethical flaw here, and it's explicitly stated, okay, pretty much like you don't want to make stuff up what could happen. Well, she didn't do this or she didn't debrief. It is stated that they said that it was going to be anonymous. And then what happened is she published them. Okay, so it's confidentiality because she published students' names and scores without written consent. She could fix this by not sharing or just sharing the scores. Okay, so again, you have that vocab word. Okay, and then you have the examples from the prompt. Now, the operational definition is going to be, what are we measuring? And when we look at this operational definition of the dependent variable, okay, it is going to be something that we could put on a graph. It's something that we could put on a diagram. Okay, we could put it into correlation, a stress score. Okay, so we need to have something quantifiable. So the stress score is the operational definition. All right, so that's kind of a lot. And you're welcome to type any questions if you do have any. But now we're going to get to our biggest unit percentage-wise on the multiple choice. So the biggest thing here is with cognitive psychology, it's broken into memory, thinking, language, and intelligence. So there's a lot in here. And let's really kind of unpack it. And I'll try to emphasize ones that I think are more likely, but as we know, anything could appear on the test. So first thing, when we're looking at memory, the basic memory is this information processing model. And we have these different types of memory. So we have our sensory, which is really our split-second holding tank. I like to think of this kind of like a snap. If you were to send this and you just look at it and it goes away, you don't pay attention, you don't screenshot it, it goes away, it's forgotten. Okay. If you pay attention to it, okay, or you screenshot it, you now are in the short-term memory. Okay, and then that working memory is really that problem solving part of our short term. So when we're looking here, let's say you screenshot that snap, you now have it on your phone. Like I can see it on the screen, I'm consciously aware of it. That's what our short term memory is. I'm aware of what I'm thinking about right at this moment. Okay, that's the part that I'm consciously aware. Okay, if I pay attention, I'm like, oh, I'm going to save that. I'm going to pay extra attention. In my memory, I encode it into long term. If I save it, I'm going to be saving it to my camera roll. Okay, so our long-term memory is like the storage on our phone. I need to go through and look for stuff to retrieve it, to bring it back to my conscious awareness on my screen. Okay, so these are some of the key components. Now, when we look at sensory memory, we have iconic and we have echoic. Picture an icon you see. Okay, you can picture your Snap icon, Instagram icon. Okay, the echoic is something that we hear. Okay, I hear echoes. So iconic is like a quick second, like a snapshot that I might hold for half a second before forgetting it. And then the echoic is something might be 3 to 4 seconds. So an example of this would be you're kind of spaced out in class and then the teacher asks a question and then you're like, oh, I got to pay attention. And you can like access that last 3 to 4 seconds. Okay. And that would be the echoic. Now, the other one is looking at this explicit and implicit memory. Okay. Which is the explicit is with conscious recall. Okay. And with conscious recall means I know I'm thinking about it. If I asked you, you know, what was the favorite dance that you went to this school year? If I asked you what you did this past weekend, if I asked what you did on your 14th birthday, you know that you're thinking about that. That's with conscious recall. And the explicit is associated with the hippocampus. We want to default to the hippocampus, certainly, but it is associated more with explicit. And then implicit memory is going to be without conscious recall. These are things that I tend to like to think about as verbs. So reading, writing, if you're typing or texting, you're not thinking about like the letters that you're typing and being very specific unless you don't know a word. So what you're probably going to be doing is, let's see. Okay. And kind of look at that. Yes, just 1 second. Okay. So yeah, if they want to looking at different pulling up the study guides or 2023 FRQs, yeah, I could do that for the second half. I do have some other things too that I don't know if I got to last year in my stuff, but I certainly did they get a chance to watch the personality? No, I'm fine. Not with the distracting. Did they get a chance to look at the stuff from like unit 7 and unit 9? I didn't know if I got to that last year.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. It's John from Marco. I was in the chat chatting with everyone. This is great. Thank you so much, Liz. It's been really good to see. I mean, there's so many things you've got to keep straight to get through the AP psychology test. But one of the things I wanted to recommend to you all, we've got a playlist on our channel with multiple sets of reviews. And one of the things we've been doing here is actually going through some of those key points from last year's review. I think some of you saw that. But we in a little bit, and by the way, if you like this stream, go ahead and press that like button. We can also make sure that at some point we've got questions. If you can take a minute and put any of the questions you've got in the chat. It's also a moment where by the end of our review, once we look at maybe some of the material we didn't get to last year, we can spend some time answering those questions, look at this study guide pack. Again, the study guide pack I've shared in the chat with you all. I'm going to put it there again. That study guide pack has reviews on each of the units. So reviews in things we haven't covered, things maybe you didn't cover in class that are available to you. So Liz, I'll let you, you can come back on here. Yes, and there's people pointing out pressing like for Marco, right? So at the end, we're going to bring Marco on at the end. We've also been getting some questions. How long is the review? The review is going to be about 1 hour. So go ahead and post those questions in the chat and we'll take a look. But Liz, go ahead. I want to let you finish what you're doing here.
Oh, no, it's all good. Yeah. If I try to put it in a different order from last year, but yeah, I definitely want that feedback so we can make sure that they're getting what they need for sure. So I guess a few things. I know I added this one. I didn't have this last year. So just looking at some of the key vocab here. So with this explicit, we have this with conscious recall. And then implicit is with that without conscious recall. So things like reading, typing, etc. Okay, so the next part though, this is something that I did add for this year is looking at the levels of processing. So this is a high flyer on the FRQ or on the multiple choice. So when we look at this levels of processing, this is looking at how do we encode? Okay, so if we have something that's shallow, it's something that's pretty superficial. We're less engaged with the material. Okay, and this is going to be in comparison to the deep processing. The deep processing is going to be the meaningful. This is where we understand and we engage with the material. So if you are doing like examples, if you are doing practice tests, if you are doing mnemonics to try to help remember, if you're using visual imagery or this elaborative rehearsal, you are going to be processing at a deeper level and are going to be able to retain it better. So make sure you're looking at this levels of processing. This is something that is definitely a high flyer. Okay, and then we do have the different types here where we have the structural versus phonetic. So structure is just like looking at it. Okay, the phonetic would be like kind of understanding or listening to how it sounds. And then that semantic, that's one I would focus on. Semantic is really understanding what you're studying. Okay, and then for this is honestly one of the biggest confusing pairs is looking at this amnesia where you have the retrograde versus antrograde, and then you have the interference. The biggest thing you have to remember is that the retro, you forget the old. Okay, so if it's retrograde amnesia, you're forgetting something before the event. If it's interference, you're forgetting something after. Excuse me, if it's interference, you're forgetting the old information, it's blocking the new. And then I do have some different examples here too that for availability versus representative. This is a high flyer. It's also, I think, one of the most confusing pairs that we have. So when we look at availability heuristic, what we're looking at here is it really relies on how easily the examples are coming to our mind. How available are the examples? So if I have to think of an example of, is it safer to fly or is it safer to drive? Okay, I am going to be thinking about a plane crash because that memory is more easily accessible, easily available. Now, the other one that's the most confusing is representativeness heuristic. Okay, and this relies how closely it matches or represents your prototype. So if I think of a computer programmer, okay, and I have Steve Jobs and Bill Gates here, I'm going to associate it with, middle-aged men that wear glasses. Okay, and that is going to be an example of how that might be my prototype. So if I see somebody not wearing glasses, or in this case, a female, they might not match my prototype. Okay, and then make sure you're looking over the stages of language and the acquisition, etc. Okay, and then the other part, okay, for the theories of language is knowing the biggest one here, I would say, is that inborn universal grammar. To make sure that you know that age and language acquisition, our brain is wired to learn them at a younger age. Okay. All right. Now, I do with the theories of intelligence, you are likely to see at least one of these. So I have these kind of weird pictures here to try to help you have some visual imagery and mnemonics. So the first thing here is with Spearman. Okay, and looking at the general intelligence, okay, what I have in the upper right corner is I have a target, okay, and what you can do is I want you to picture G at the center of the target, and you're going to have a man holding a spear, throwing the spear at the letter G. This is a way for us to associate the person, okay, with the theory. So the general intelligence is our most traditional view. It's going to be our IQ. If you have an IQ of 100, that's what we're trying to measure with general intelligence. The other is going to be Gardner, which is multiple intelligences. So Gardner's multiple intelligences, I have a garden here. And what I picture is a garden, and I'm like growing different intelligences. So I have like music notes coming up, I have letters coming up. So then that helps me associate Gardner with multiple intelligences. And then finally, we have Sternberg's triarchic theory, and picturing an iceberg and a baseball cap, and that's going to be that creative, analytical, and practical. Now, here's the thing. When we look at these theories, you have to know what the theory is, what it supports. General intelligence, most traditional view. Multiple intelligences is going to best support savant syndrome, which is that island of genius that exists with some people who might have disabilities. And then when we're looking at measuring intelligence, this validity and reliability is the most crucial. Validity is going to be measuring, does it measure what it says it's measuring? And reliability, is it consistent? So if I'm reliable, that means that if I get a 5 in New York, Wisconsin, or California, it all means the same thing. All right, any questions so far, or anything else you want me to add from cognitive or anything else you want me to review?
Based in the chat, I think we're good.
Perfect. Okay. So with clinical psych, this is 12 to 16%. And there are a few things that I want to go over here. So the first thing is this. Okay, with this unit, we have the psychological perspectives. So the psychological perspectives is really looking at how are we explaining the causes and treatments of disorders. And we're going to use these from different perspectives. And this is really nice to learn at the end of the year because it connects everything that we've been doing. So if I'm looking at something like depression, okay, depression, I can explain from 3 different perspectives. I can look at it from a biological perspective, and that's anything with the brain or body, and look at how there's low levels of serotonin. Okay, I can look at it from a cognitive perspective and looking at how the way in which people they talk to themselves might be more negative or pessimistic. I could look at it too from a behavioral standpoint. Are they engaging in different behaviors that could be contributing to these negative thoughts? Okay, so when we look at these perspectives, we can look at how this connects to the disorders, but we can really use this to explain any behavior whatsoever. Now, the biggest thing to know for this is the symptoms and causes of disorders. And I feel like a lot of that is probably something that we remember pretty easily. It's probably something that we researched or learned about more recently. But the treatment is where we tend to get tripped up a little bit. Okay, so when we look at the treatment, the first one I want to talk about is psychoanalysis. Now, psychoanalysis is really that first treatment that really came to the forefront. Certainly could still be used. It's called psychodynamic theory, but when we look at it in the traditional sense, this is all Freud. So psychoanalysis would use things like free association. Okay, so free association would be the patient would be laying on a couch, and then they would just say whatever comes to mind. And what he's going to listen for is two things. Okay, one is resistance, and I'll just kind of start that. Resistance would be they're talking and they're talking, then all of a sudden they stop talking and they change subjects. Okay, so they change topics. What are they blocking? What are they resisting? Freud would look and be like, hey, let's look at that a little bit further. The other is transference, which is very similar to the to psycho, or is very similar to displacement. The transference might be I'm really upset, like the patient is really upset with their mom, so they take it out on their therapist. They're transferring those feelings to the therapist. Okay, so that's the most traditional, or like the original treatment method. Okay, the other is going to be humanistic. Now, both psychoanalytic and humanistic are called insight therapies because they are going to be what is the humanistic client-centered. They're going to be looking at like, I'm going to gain my own insight to my problems. Okay, so the humanistic perspective is really, humanistic is very huggy. It's all about growth. It's all about like that self-actualization. Carl Rogers is an important name to know here. He utilized that client-centered therapy. And the big term you need to know here is unconditional positive regard. Okay, that's the big term that you want to know with this. So the humanistic theory is going to be looking at how can we best help the client through active listening in a supportive environment, et cetera. Okay, and then the behavioral perspective is going to be looking at anything with learning like classical operant conditioning, systematic desensitization, et cetera. And then the cognitive is going to be anything with our thoughts. Okay, and these two are really called action therapies because you have to do something, you have to make active changes. Okay. And with behavioral, like I said, systematic desensitization, counter conditioning, cognitive, you have like rational emotive behavioral therapy, you have cognitive behavioral therapy, etc. Okay. So there are a few questions here. And I think this is a good break before we get into another big unit. The best things to look at before, honestly, if you're looking at what to study, I say research design, which is why I really wanted to emphasize that to begin at the beginning. And I know a lot of times people are like kind of worried about names and things like that, like the names of the theorists. I would rather have you, I think it's more important to know the theory rather than the name of the person who did it. I know the person who did it would probably disagree. But the big thing is if you know the theory, you know how to apply it. You might have one question that says, which person did this theory? Okay. Or which person did this experiment? Maybe two. And honestly, I think one will be more than enough. So if you're looking at what do you study tonight, research design, cognitive psych, motivation, emotion, and the theorist, and how to apply it. That's really what I would be looking at. Okay. And the best names to study are really the ones, that you could probably remember already. So what I would say is like Freud, Bandura, Skinner, Pavlov, Milgram, Zimbardo. Those are kind of some of the big names. But if you're like, I would not prioritize names. If you're looking for icing on the cake, go ahead, go look at names. Like you feel like you got everything, that might help get you a few questions, but it's not going to help you on the FRQ either. Okay, and then the other, okay, so kind of the same thing, talk about the different psychologists and different studies. I'd focus on the studies, okay? And if you can pair it, another time you might see is like Bandura's observational learning. Like you'll see the name associated with it, but you don't need to know just the name, if that makes sense, okay? I do have a few names here that we can go through when we're looking at motivation, emotion, and personality. Now, this is a big one that also appears a lot on the FRQ. Okay. So the first thing we want to look at with these theories of motivation is really going from biological, okay, and going down to this cognitive here. So when we look at these, there, names here, I would say would be Maslow, okay, Abraham Maslow, and looking there. Okay. And then see, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to unsuccessfully multitask here. Okay. So the theories of motivation then would be really looking at this evolutionary and instinct theory, and looking at how we we're programmed in our DNA to engage in certain behaviors. I always like the example of the sea turtles hatching and they know to go to the sea, but no, their mom isn't there showing them where to go. Drive reduction, we're hungry, so we eat. And then incentive theory. So incentive is a high flyer, I would say. So the incentive theory is going to be, I have some extrinsic motivator. So you're motivated to study right now because you want to pass the AP exam. Okay. So that is going to be a key component. That incentive. Why are you studying? I want college credit. Okay. Optimum arousal theory is going to be then looking at, let's say I'm bored and I go and eat. I'm probably eating even if I'm not hungry because I'm bored. I'm seeking this other stimulation. Okay. And then the Yerkes-Dodson law is really saying that it kind of looks like this. Okay. Like a bell curve. Here, you're going to have a sad face. Like if you don't have a lot of energy here, you're going to be like super anxious. You want this spot here. You're moderately aroused for optimum success. So when you go in to take your AP test tomorrow, you probably don't want to be all on like pre-workout and bubbler and Starbucks and all this kind of stuff. You probably want to be like focused, but not like anxious. Okay. And that's how you'll perform your best. And then Maslow's, make sure that the triangle in each stages, and then you have this intrinsic. Anytime you see like intrinsic, it's that internal. So you're studying, you probably took psychology because it sounded interesting. The extrinsic, you took AP so you can get the credit. There's a question too on explaining positive psychology. Now, positive psychology goes along really well with humanistic. So positive psychology would be studying things, and this could go along with motivation very well. Studying things like how are people resilient? How are people successful? How do people have high academic achievement or just achievement in general? Studying more of those positive elements of psychology instead of looking at illnesses. Okay, let's look at what makes people like successful and what do they do and how do we teach that to people and how do we learn about it? That's what positive psychology would study. Okay. To go back, and sorry, I thought I deleted that. The incentive theory is really an extrinsic motivator that is going to motivate you to do some type of behavior. So it could be a award. It could be, you study now for 15 minutes and then you take 5 minutes off. That's your incentive for studying for 15 minutes. That is what that's what the incentive theory would be. All right. Now, this one I also did add because I wanted to make sure to go over this when we're looking at the theories of emotion. So the theories of emotion are going to be really rooted in affective neuroscience, so emotional neuroscience. And what we're looking at here is I started out with the biological basis of emotion. Okay, so when we're reviewing the brain, okay, we have a stimuli. Okay, so let's say we are on a hike, okay, and we see something that looks like a snake, but it's really a stick. Okay, that stimuli, okay, it's going to go to my eyes and then go to my thalamus. Now, my thalamus could route it right to the amygdala. Okay, and the amygdala is like danger, danger, and then I have a fear response. So I might be walking, okay, I see the stick and I jump back. Okay, that would be the low road. Now, what's going to happen here is the thalamus, the job is to go from the eyes, the thalamus, to the high road, the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is that part of the brain that is for vision. Okay, so that's what that sensory cortex is. And then it's going to take it down to the amygdala and be afraid. So you're walking, you jump back before you even realize what it is. And then you look at it, you're like, oh, it's just a stick. Okay, so it went to the low road first, almost like a spinal cord reflex, and then it goes to the high road and after you can process it. Now, the reason I teach that first is because these other theories are really going to align. Now, I do think it's a high probability that you will have one of these. If I were to guess for as far as an FRQ, the two-factor theory is a really good one for the FRQ. So when we look at these theories, the James Lange theory really is the low road. Okay, what's going to happen here is my heart starts racing and then I realize I'm afraid. Okay, and then I am afraid. There's no cognitive appraisal at all. So imagine like you see a snake, you jump back, you jumped back before you realized you were afraid. Okay, that's James Lange theory. Now, Cannon-Bard theory, okay, is going to be the Cannon-Bard theory is going to be simultaneous. So you have the jumping back and afraid at the same time. I think about that. The Cannon-Bard CB are together in the alphabet. Okay, so the emotion and the physiological arousal happen at the same time. Now, this two-factor theory, okay, the two-factor theory is one, you have that physiological arousal, okay, or physiological response, heart's racing, butterflies in your stomach, and then you have a cognitive label of that. Okay, so this is what makes this one unique. When you're reading multiple choice, always look to see if you realize it's a theory of emotion, read through it. Okay, and when you're reading through it, make sure that you have that you know the cognitive, if there's a cognitive, is if it says something, they appraise, they assess, they interpret the situation. So you're sitting at your AP test tomorrow, no matter what. I'm sure a lot of you are going to have butterflies, maybe your palms are sweating. What's going to happen is they are going to, you could tell yourself, excuse me, you could tell yourself, okay, I'm focused, I'm ready, let's just get this test started. And then I'm probably going to have like a neutral response, maybe even excited. If I sit down and I interpret my butterflies, my palms sweating is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do so bad on this test. Why did I even take it? You're probably going to feel anxious. The way you think about your physiological response determines your emotions. Okay. And I did have a question here. Where can we find practice AP multiple choice questions? That's a good question. You do have it available if in AP Classroom that you could have the teacher could post it. I know we're kind of to the last hour here. I do believe if you just Google, I think it's the 2012 AP exam, it's not going to have everything up to date, especially with clinical psych. Some of the vocab isn't going to be up to date, but you would still see some practice. And I think that's just a free resource that is out there. Otherwise, you could go to like quizzes and set up a student account and see if you can find some practice questions on there. That would be my recommendation. And when you do that, when you do those practice questions, make sure if you get one wrong, you're writing it down so you know to look at it. That's really the point of doing those multiple choice questions. All right, now the other part too is when this will be the last thing that I'll look at. And then the rest of the presentation, because I did change the order minus that first research design, I try to change the order. So the stuff that you probably had in the previous ones are going to be after this. So the theories of personality, what we're looking at is you definitely need to know Freud. Now, do I think that you're going to see things with the like psychosexual stages? Probably not as likely. So when we're prioritizing here what to study, here's what I say. Definitely know the id, ego, superego. The ego is that mediator between the id, which is that kind of that devil on your one shoulder. If you think of those old cartoons, the devil on the one shoulder saying, hey, do this, do this. Okay, that's your pleasure principle, where the super ego is more like, hey, this is the angel on the shoulder saying, no, do this, study, 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 or go on TikTok. Okay. And the ego is going to say, okay, I'm going to study for 20 minutes and then I'm going to watch 5 minutes of TikTok reels. Okay. I really don't think these are going to be as likely. You will see a defense mechanism. Okay. So I would look at projection. I would look at displacement and I would look at reaction formation. Those are the three that I would prioritize. So again, displacement, projection, and reaction formation. Those are the ones that I would prioritize. Certainly anything could be on there, but those are the three that I would suggest. Okay. The other part I'm going to skip to is this. Okay. it is really important that you look at this big five because this is another key component on the unit 5 top turn, or excuse me, on the FRQ. So the FRQ here is going to be, you could see a question where it says the big five trait of openness, of conscientiousness, of extroversion. If it says just one, you don't need to explain all of them. Okay. You just need to explain the one. Okay. So make sure you look at that again. If you're prioritizing what to study, this is definitely one thing to add to that list. Okay. And as you continue to go through, another one. Sorry, I know I said I was going to be done. This is another high flyer on the FRQ is self-efficacy. I think it's appeared 5 or 6 times in the last 10 years. Self-efficacy is going to be the belief that I have the skill set to be successful at something. So the self-efficacy is going to be if I believe that if I study, if I do these reviews, if I do these practice tests, then I'm going to be successful on the AP test. Having that belief will motivate you to engage in those behaviors so that you're successful. So this is another big one that I would make sure that I know. All right, and now the rest here should be pretty similar to the to last year. And so I'll stop here and see if there's any other questions or any from John.
Great. It's been a great group here in the chat. And maybe one thing, Liz, we can do is actually pull up this. I'm going to pull up the study guide pack, which I've got. Make sure I've got the right link. And everyone, if you go to the chat and you look at the top of the chat, I've pinned this here. So let me share my screen. And Liz, maybe this is a good moment to just strategize as a group about what we're going to do the night before. It is 7:52 Eastern time. Over in Wisconsin, it's 6:52. Out in California, with all them sunny, nice people, it's a lot earlier. I've got this 35-page study guide pack. Should I try to memorize the whole thing? Like, what's a great way to cut through?
I think, if you look at, because the presentation that I shared too should be linked, I would really organize based on the percentage that is the percentages on the exam. And I would definitely make sure you know that research design, it's 10 to 14% of the multiple choice, plus we know it's that FRQ. Then I would look at cognitive psych. A few things with cognitive psych, I would make sure, like as far as the free response goes, a lot of times that thinking stuff is going to appear on there. So I would definitely make sure to look at that. And then, kind of work your way backwards with those percentages. Motivation, emotion, and personality is another big one. And then honestly, too, learning is, and I know I didn't get to it tonight, but I'm 85% sure that I did last year. And that is a really great one because in the learning unit, even though it's only 7 to 9% of the AP test, it's pretty focused. Like you can say, this is what's likely to appear out of that 7 to 9 questions. So that's a good way to strategize as well.
Great. Another thing I wanted to pull up here too, and I encourage you, if you guys have questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat. This is something we didn't cover in last year's review. And I'm just curious, there's 2 sets of these FRQs from last year. Were there any surprises that came up in last year's exam or anything about this? This feels like this fits in with a lot of what people were expecting. I'm just curious if there was any memorable pieces from last year's.
I think last year's the big thing that if you go down to question 2, where it says starting with Michael, and keep going, I'm not sure if this one had it, but one had
or maybe it's set
p-value.
2.
Yeah, it was the one that my students got. I know that. So
Is it
the
this
big thing
one
here, the best advice I have for you with the FRQ is you have to know that you are going to see things on this test that you may not have learned in class. And that's okay. I mean, I've been teaching this class for 17 years. I do not think I would get 100%. I'm confident I'd get a 5, but maybe not 100%. So just plan that you won't know everything. So yeah, the one that threw me off here was that bottom where it says, explain what the p-value allows MGC to conclude about the study.
Oh, yes.
So
okay.
if the p-value is less than 0.05, and in this case, did it say it's 0.001? Okay, so if it's less than 0.05, you can say that it is statistically significant, which means the results are not likely due to chance. Okay, so if you're writing stuff down, okay, and you're getting a question that says, explain the significance of, or explain the importance of statistical significance, what can you conclude with the p-value? Here's what you do. The p-value is less than 0.05. Okay, that means that it is statistically significant and the results are not likely due to chance. Okay, which means here, and I haven't read this one in a while, that the independent variable likely caused the change in the dependent variable. And here's my recommendation too with these questions that are posted. I know some of you may be studying with friends, or if you're studying alone, you could study maybe with a family member. This is really a great way to get a lot of stuff done and to work at it with a higher level. So for example, I can read this scenario and I could say, okay, what's the peripheral route to persuasion? That's when I'm appealing to the emotions to try to change someone's behavior. And then I would have to explain how that would relate to the scenario of the campaign. Excuse me. And then I can go and check the other thing with the FRQ. I can see exactly what would have scored on the rubric. And you can get through a lot of vocab that way, and you're doing it at a higher level.
Yeah, in fact, I want to show you all, everyone, somebody was asking, how do I find these? There's this really
Yes.
cool thing that you can do, which is to go like this, AP Psychology, and you go to FRQs. When you get to the College Board's website, and let me pop this in the chat for you all, grab this link. I'm showing you how to do it on Google. You'll see past exam questions. And here's what's awesome about this website. The 2023 free response questions, a great place to go. There are 2 sets. Then there are 2 sets, one for each set, a set of scoring guidelines, a chief reader report. Maybe Liz, you could tell it's a little bit like what a chief reader report says about how this works. Have you? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I would start, the chief reader report is going to say like what percentage of people scored and kind of some of the common misconceptions that kids had. I would, if you look at like the scoring guidelines for set 2, the question that we were just on, and you scrolled, yep. You're going to see here, if
Am I in the right
you,
one? Or wait, let me see. Here's question 2. Yep.
yeah. So if you go down to, yeah, just right there, that peripheral route that I was, yeah. So what's going to happen here is it's going to say, this is what you have to say. Okay, that's what's going to score. And the thing I love about this too is they have the acceptable explanations. Okay, so here are 3 different examples that may have scored when students were writing it. So you, like I said, you can get a lot of studying done, and really you might spend 7 to 10 minutes on an FRQ if you're doing it verbally. And you can get through a lot of vocab, and it's all high level. It's not the memorization. You have to make sure that you know it. The other thing that's great is that if you don't know the peripheral route to persuasion, you have to look it up so then that you can apply it. So if I were doing this with a friend, I might answer the set 1, and then they kind of look at the rubric, and then I'd switch spots with set 2. And with that set 2, you just, the other person is going to answer it, and then you're looking at the rubric.
Great. So this is one of those last minute things. If it is,
Yes.
5 o'clock,
Mhm.
don't what is that saying? Don't boil the ocean. Don't go after
Yeah.
everything, guys. Grab
Right.
one thing. Go to this free response set
Yep.
2. Go down to question 2. It was one of the harder ones, the mobile game
Yes.
central. Read and break down that question, and then take a look at the answer key. And
Mhm.
really seriously think about this in parts, everyone. Just as you were emphasizing earlier, Liz, this is less about quantity and jamming all of this in your head and focusing on the stuff that really is going to be kind of right sized for the moment.
Right.
So a couple things real quick as we wrap up. I want to check any questions that you all have, any final questions for me and Liz. And also, I want to hear, I want to see more likes on this video and some sheep emoji in the chat so we can bring Margot on to kind of round us out and remind you all that you are not, in fact, cooked, that you are still in the refrigerator, you're still in the freezer. You're the chicken that should have been taken out before mom got home, but you didn't take it out, so you're about to get yelled at. Nobody is cooked. You rely on what you've been doing for the last 9 months to get yourselves ready for this test.
Exactly.
It's not about what you crammed the night before.
Right.
So, Liz, any other parting thoughts or words of wisdom as students are thinking about? Because I see a couple of questions about like,
I
do we
think
need some neurotransmitters, that sort of thing? Yeah.
Yes, I think another great way is if you can find a Quizlet, and I know they're out there, is something with like confusing pairs. Because at confusing pairs, you're really studying twice as much, and you probably know it's either this or this. So you're cutting out a lot of that extra fluff, I would say. So the confusing pairs is another good strategy as well. And actually, too, I can post a link.
Yeah, if you give me that link, I can share it with the
Yes,
group.
if you want to, are there any other questions while I'm,
No, there's been a couple of technical questions, but all those technical questions, I want you guys to check out the study guide pack that we've shared with you. It's in the description in the chat. And I think it's time to see Marco. So Marco,
I
come
think
on
it's
up.
time to see Marco too.
Marco, come on up. Come on up. No, see, last night he did this too. He was like, I'm sleeping. Come on. Marco, come on up. No, guys, I don't think I'm not sure it's gonna happen. Maybe we'll have to hang on. I'm gonna have to come down this way. Um, and come here. Oh, actually, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to do a special surprise, everyone. This has only happened once in the calculus stream. We're going to bring on both Marco and Nina. Marco has a kid sister. So let's do it, everyone. Marco first. Marco, come here. Come here. Hi. Oh, there he is. Well, he's not here. Come here. Come over. Come over here. He's getting stuck. He's getting stuck in between the chair and the table. I'm going to start with Nina first. Nina, come here. Okay. So this is Marco's kid sister, Nina, who never gets any attention. Actually, there's the both of them. Nina, come here. Nina. Nina. No, Marco, come here. Come here. Good boy. So there's Marco. You got to glance at Nina. Marco, 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 Marco. Everyone wants to say hello. And here. So this is Marco telling you, Marco, that you are not in fact cooked. And he's also running off camera. Oh, because I have treats. So hang on. Everyone, we're feeding Marco treats live in front of the fireplace. Now we have excitement. Here we go. This is some classical conditioning, right? Every time a bell rings,
Absolutely, it is.
Marco gets a treat. And so this happens live on the air. There we go. Sit down. There we go. And wish them all good luck. So you got a double Samoyed cloud party. You got some kind of conditioning happening. This is terrifying. Now they're stalking me. Look at them. Now they're stuck. That's one to screenshot. So listen, everyone, best of luck on your exams. You are not cooked. And I hope that you have a great day tomorrow. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We're going to be doing some after party events and some other things. Marco and Nina will be there. And we all hope that you have a great exam. Best of luck, everyone.